All right, let's get right into it. Today we're basically hitting the pause button on the world to look at one single day, March 11th, 2026. What you're about to see is how a few major global events, all happening at the exact same time, are not just happening side by side, they're actually woven together in some pretty surprising ways.
Think about it. We've got an active war in the Persian Gulf, a terrible humanitarian crisis unfolding in Kenya, and some serious jitters in the financial markets. On the surface, they seem totally separate, but they're not. They're all part of one big, interconnected story, and we're going to untangle it right now.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with a big picture look at the global situation. Then we're going to dive into each of these major stories one by one. And at the end, and this is the important part, we'll connect all the dots so you can see how it all fits together.
So on this specific day, it feels like the whole global system has warning lights flashing all over the dashboard. We're seeing serious stress on the military front, in our legal systems, with the environment, and in the world of finance, all at the same time. It's a moment where everything is kind of coming to a head, and we need to break down what that really means.
First up, let's head to the Persian Gulf. There's a conflict here involving the US, Israel, and Iran. It's called Operation Epic Fury, and it's just hit day 12. And believe me, the stakes here are about as high as they get.
So, in just the last 24 hours, there's been a major naval move. The U.S. military took action to stop Iran from shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you have to understand, this little strip of water is a massive choke point for the world's oil supply. If it gets closed off, the shockwaves hit the global economy almost instantly.
And these numbers, they really tell the story. You can see the human cost for both U.S. forces and, according to Tehran, Iranian civilians. But look at the strategic cost. Traffic through that all-important strait, it's plummeted from about 24 tankers a week down to just 3. That is a huge sign of the disruption that's going on.
And here is the immediate result for the global economy. The price of oil has jumped to $119 a barrel. Now, that's not just some abstract number. That's like a tax on the entire world, and it's being driven completely by the chaos in this one critical region. So, is there any chance this all ends quickly? Well, that's looking pretty unlikely. Iran has a new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, and he's known for being a hardliner. He's already rejected any talk of surrender, which tells you that Tehran is probably digging in for a long, tough fight. And that just means more uncertainty for everyone.
Okay, so while that hot war is raging in the Gulf, there's a totally different kind of fight happening on the legal front. All around the world, it seems, we're seeing this massive push to hold people and systems accountable for some really terrible failures.
Now, at first glance, a UN declaration about Ukraine and reopening the Jeffrey Epstein investigation in New Mexico, they seem like they're from different planets, right? But what connects them is this growing demand for justice, a demand to go after the powerful, organized systems that caused so much damage.
I mean, just look at this. The UN report on Ukrainian children is just staggering. This chart shows that out of the cases they looked into, a full 80% of those children have not been returned. It means for most of them, this terrible displacement is, well, it's permanent.
And then you have what's happening in New Mexico. Investigators have gotten their hands on sealed FBI files, and it's prompted them to go back and look at Jeffrey Epstein's ranch all over again. But this time, they're not just looking at him. They're hunting for co-conspirators and really digging into how the authorities might have dropped the ball in the past. It's about finding the entire network.
All right, let's shift gears now. We've talked about man-made conflict and crime. Now let's turn to a crisis where nature and, frankly, human planning have collided to create an absolute catastrophe. We're going to East Africa.
This timeline really shows you how incredibly fast this situation went from bad to worse. We're talking less than a week. It started with heavy rains, and then suddenly, boom, the river bursts its banks, and Kenya's capital, Nairobi, is underwater.
And the knock-on effects are just brutal. You've got thousands of people forced from their homes, massive power outages, even international flights are having to reroute. And now, on top of the immediate danger from the floods, officials are worried about what comes next, outbreaks of diseases like cholera and malaria.
But here's the thing you have to understand. This wasn't just some random act of nature. Researchers are pointing out that this crisis was made so much worse by human issues. Things like poor city planning and environmental damage meant that Nairobi was incredibly vulnerable when a disaster like this finally hit.
Okay, now for the money. We're about to look at a part of the financial world that's huge. We're talking $2 trillion, but it mostly operates behind the scenes. It's called private credit, and it's starting to show some really serious signs of stress. This is where big funds lend money directly to companies, and that whole system is now being tested.
So how did this all start to wobble? It's basically a chain reaction. The first domino was the energy shock from the war in Iran. That got investors nervous. Then they start worrying about other things, like how good all this company debt really is. So a giant like JPMorgan starts marking down the value of some of its loans, and that spooks everyone else. Suddenly, other huge firms are slamming on the brakes, telling investors they can't take all their money out.
And here's why this is such a big deal. The whole reason this private credit market got so enormous was because it was supposed to be the safe, quiet alternative to the crazy ups and downs of the stock market. But these events are pulling the curtain back, and we're seeing that it has its own major weak spots that are now being exposed.
So we've looked at a war, a fight for justice, a natural disaster, and shaky markets. They all feel like their own separate stories, right? Well, they're not. None of this is happening in a vacuum, and now we're going to connect the dots. There's a perfect term for what's happening in the Persian Gulf, the siren economy. It basically means that even when the U.S. military is winning battles on the ground, the bigger picture for the region and for the global economy is actually getting less stable, not more. It's like the warning sirens are still blaring no matter what the day's headlines say.
And what's the thread that ties the UN report in Ukraine to the Epstein investigation in New Mexico? It's this idea of judicial integrity. It's a huge test for our legal systems. Can they actually deliver justice when they're up against massive, systemic crimes that were orchestrated by incredibly powerful people, or even entire countries? And here are the final, direct links that snap everything together. That energy shock from the war in Iran, it's not just a regional issue. It's putting direct pressure on that $2 trillion credit market we talked about. And at the same time, the awful floods in Kenya are this really stark reminder of the fragile planet that all of these other dramas are playing out on.
So we're living in a world where a military crisis, a legal crisis, an environmental one, and a financial one can all blow up on the very same day. In an age where all these risks are colliding and feeding off each other, it leaves us with one really big and, frankly, unsettling question: what comes next?